You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
I would say that what we bring to the table is a solution that will lower the carbon footprint. Our solution has the lowest carbon footprint irrespective of the biosolids outlet.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
I think one of the reasons why we've been so successful is that we've been very focused on where our core competency lies.
I'm your host, Antoine Valter, and in today's episode, I'm thrilled to welcome Eirik Fadnes as my guest.
There's a reason why we decided to go public about a year ago. We raised capital in order to invest more heavily in the DBO segment.
Eirik is the CEO of the Cambi group.
I think one of the largest bottlenecks we have is marketing or knowledge about our solution. So increasing that awareness is important to ensure growth.
Cambi is on a mission to turn sludge into resources. We'll explore how they do that in just a minute. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you've for sure already heard that there's no waste in wastewater. We've explained how the words sewage might be the equivalent to 320 nuclear power reactors, and we've regularly touched on how that wastewater is probably one of the best sources of water we have at hand in the new realm of water scarcity. Now, in the dirty world of wastewater, there's an even dirtier side to be found on the sludge line. Imagine that's the waste. How good or useful can it be? Well, first, that's also an amazing bioresource that you can turn into biogas, but also biosolids that can be valorized. And that's where Cambi's magic happens. With their thermal hydrolysis process, they can increase the biogas production by up to 50% while halving the volume of those biosolids, which means twice fewer trucks to deal with it. I let Eirik explain to us in simple terms how, to quote him, his giant pressure cooker delivers that amazing result, and we'll get to discuss a bit deeper the business model and the strategy of a company that went through its IPO in 2021. Right before we start, let me remind you that if you like what you hear, you can help me up incredibly by sharing that content around you. Tell your friends, colleagues, or LinkedIn network what you found inspiring in what Eirik explains today. And if you don't like what you hear, please reach out to me and tell me what I should be doing differently or better. Come on, do it, and I'll meet you on the other side.
You're listening to Don't Waste Water, the podcast that helps water professionals to improve their wastewater treatment, optimize their operation costs, and keep up with the latest market trends. This podcast is brought to you by GF Piping Systems. As a leading supplier of piping systems made of plastics and metal, GF Piping Systems is the global expert for the safe and reliable transportation of water, chemicals, and gas. For more information, visit gfps.com.
Hi, Eirik. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Antoine. Thank you for inviting me.
I was revealing you my secret in the chit chat just before we started, because today we will be talking about your process and your company, which is dealing with hydrolysis of sludge in a very special and interesting way. And that's a topic where I was involved a long time ago and without any success. So I'm jealous and envious, and I want to understand what you do much better than the student I was doing at the time. But jokes aside, I have a tradition on that podcast, which is to open with a postcard. And you're sending a postcard from Oslo. So what can you tell me about Oslo, which I would ignore by now?
Oslo is a beautiful city with land area that's covered by forest and parks, so 50% of it. And the fjord extends all the way to the city center. And even though it's the capital of Norway, I think if you were to visit sometime, Antoine, you would probably call it a village. It's landly. It's probably the only city you would visit that's got its own highway for bees. So it's a unique and environmental city.
I have to say, I was once in Oslo to visit our sales company for GF Piping System in Oslo. And what I noticed is that from their office, they have a view on a ski track. And I was like, that's where I want to live. And then my wife told me, you better come back. So I didn't stay in Oslo, but that might happen at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, so I usually don't speak that much about myself. So it's not about me, it's about Cambi today. And you're the CEO of Cambi. And if I'm right, Cambi is your first encounter with the water industry. So how did that happen? And What was your feeling about that industry you discovered?
You're right. It is my first encounter with the industry, and I think that is in a way by chance. When I first talked with the founder of Cambi, what I found attractive and interesting was the fact that, well, first of all, it was a company with almost a 3 decade history. It was a company that was by far the global market leader. They had successfully gotten their solutions installed in many of the bigger cities of the world, but they were still at the stage where they were only scratching the surface. I saw it as a great company, and after having several discussions, I got in love with the industry. So some coincidence there, but a great fit for me.
You mentioned how Cambi is a clear leader. We'll go a bit deeper into that in the deep dive about your 77 references, how you're present in 24 countries, if I'm right. But right before, I'd like to get the elevator pitch to Cambi. How would you do that?
Cambi delivers a unique and disruptive technology to the water and waste sector, advancing the circular economy by ensuring full hydrogenization and maximum resource recovery, mainly from the treatment of sludge from wastewater treatment plants, but also other difficult to treat organic waste. So many cities in the world. You mentioned 24 countries. Actually, I'm happy to say that we got our first contract in Morocco, so it's up to 25 countries at the moment. And many cities, they use our solution to make treatment cheaper and more sustainable.
So I'm noting some keywords. I picked resource recovery, circular economy, and that you're not doing only sludge, which is something I ignored. So probably those are elements which will come back in the deep dive. You mentioned how you're helping utilities to make their process more efficient and probably cheaper. I'm just wondering, what is the first thing they come to you with? What is the challenge they want to solve when you start discussing with a utility?
It really depends. It's not one set of drivers, but in some cases, it may be that they need to increase their capacity, but they don't have the available land to build more digesters, for example. They could opt to go for THP, which will triple the throughput on existing digesters. It could be that they're looking at lowering their operating costs because the handling cost of the biosolids is high in the region. The fact that we halve the volume of the biosolids is also higher quality, nutrient rich, and free of pathogens and fallout odor. So it really depends on the drivers in the city or in the area.
You're in a field which has long been, now really from my external eye, a green field. I mentioned how I was involved a bit on my very humble level. At that time, the technology I was looking at was ultrasonic hydrolysis of sludge. Then, when I was working with Suez, we were looking at way to do this hydrolysis of sludge with ozone. And I have to say, all the encounters I have seen myself were not very successful. So it sounds like there's a real challenge in the industry, but there's not like one be all technology which was ruling all of that, unless you found the martingale. So would you say that we are now at a stage where your process is really something which is now mature enough to have this bold statement, which you said to be a clear leader?
Of course, it's been a long journey, introducing a new technology, and the industry is very conservative. It takes time to develop a market by yourself. Obviously, we have competitors, but our market share is 90% outside of China, so we have a very strong position. But it's taken time, and to gain that trust and to show that we are in it for the long run, that is extremely important. I can give you an example. In the US, we spent 10 years from when we started working there until we landed the first contract in Washington, D.C. So once you have that domestic reference plant, the others follow quicker after, right? It's still long processes, as you know, but it takes time to penetrate the market with what I would say is still a young solution in some people's eyes. But as I mentioned, we have 3 decades of history. So.
If I take the example of Washington, D.C., what is the activation trigger which made you go from 10 years in the making to now you have a reference?
For Washington, it was a long process where they evaluated many different options for their plants. One of the benefits with THP, which they've spoken about externally as well, is that they achieved an investment saving of 35% or $200 million directly attributable to the Cambi THP. And on top of that, they're saving $20 million per year in operating costs. So the drivers in that project were extreme, right? I would call it a greenfield project. In the US, you may argue it's a brownfield because they had existing treatment other places. But in some cases like that, you have an immediate payback or it's a negative effect of it. Right? So I think that was one of the main drivers for why they opted to go with Cambi THP.
You mentioned resource recovery and circular economy as some of the drivers for Cambi. And we've always said it's wastewater treatment plants. And more we hear the term water resource factory or resource factory without the water element. And if that shift really happens, then your process becomes a no-brainer because you're just increasing the yield of that transformation. Where are we as an industry on that shift from treatment plants to resource factory?
That's a very good question, Antoine. I think you're right that sewage sludge is, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but it's an amazing bioresource. Both the biogas that you can generate, but also the biosolids, which is increasingly perceived as a valuable resource for water companies and local communities. We operate globally, and we can certainly see a change in perception for example, in the US and in Korea, but also in what we define as emerging markets, like South Africa, Colombia, Brazil. And an example of that is the national mission for clean Ganga in India, where they're looking at not only sanitation, but also a biosolids master plan, how they can make the best use of the resources.
So what's the driver? What is driving that?
I think it depends again on where you are. In some areas where you have an established mechanism to either as a public entity recharge the cost of handling the biosolids or to use private companies in that way, you see a drive to have a higher quality biosolids that opens up for more outlets. So you can see the value of having a Class A product that you can land apply, substitute the chemical fertilizer, and or use it as a soil improver. So it really depends. But if you don't have a cost of getting rid of the biosolids, then it will end up in your backyard or in the river, and then the drivers are weak.
You mentioned THP, thermal hydrolysis. P is for plant, right? I'm just trying to unveil the acronym.
Yes, the thermal hydrolysis
Process. Okay. Can you swiftly explain in simple terms how your thermal hydrolysis process works and where it fits inside a plant?
Essentially, it is a giant pressure cooker. So sewage sludge from the wastewater treatment plant is first dewatered, typically to 16%. So it's preheated using recycled steam. And from the preheater, the warm sludge passes through a pressure vessel where it's mixed with steam until you get a temperature of 160 degrees at a 6 bars pressure. And it holds there for 20 to 30 minutes, and at the end of the cycle you have a sudden pressure drop down to atmospheric pressure, which disintegrates the cells and reducing the sludge viscosity and making the feedstock very suitable for anaerobic digestion. So you get the increased biogas production up to 40%, and you get half the volume of the biosolids compared to a conventional method.
By how much do you estimate you can enhance the biogas production?
Up to 40%. We have seen cases where we have achieved 43%, but generally really depends on the local circumstances. It is anywhere between 25 and 40% normally.
You mentioned before that the utilities which come to you have challenges which are that they want to increase their capacity, that they want to lower their OPEX or reduce the sludge volume. Is that something they have from the designing of the plants on and then it's a new build solution? Or do you most of the time operate as an enhancement and upgrade of existing facilities?
We do both. Most of our projects are brownfield projects, but for sure, greenfield projects have very strong drivers for our solution. We can come in with whether it's a containerized thermal hydrolysis process that we put on a slab and connect, or if it's part of a larger project where they need to increase capacity or other drivers, we come in with modules and install it. So it's very suitable for brownfield and the greenfield projects.
So I noted the containerized keyword. I'm coming back to that a bit later because I have some questions about that as well. But you mentioned also some advantages. So we've seen the obvious, I would say, advantage that you are enhancing the biogas production. All of them are linked together, but it's not the only benefit. I was thinking, we are now some days away from the Global Water Summit in Madrid, which is going to look at how our water industry will tend to net zero and carbon neutrality and carbon positivity even. And I would see that as something where your process has a strong asset. Is that a driver which you see emerging and developing? Would you say it is a benefit of your solution?
I would say that that is one of my favorite advantages of our solution. And I am very encouraged to see the pace at which water and wastewater utilities are adopting net zero, setting net zero pledges, carbon or climate targets. And I believe at the moment there's around 80 utilities that set such targets, so that's serving 230 million people, and the number of utilities are growing. We are currently serving 14 of these utilities. They're running more than 30 of our plants, but the drivers on carbon footprint was not the reason for many of these decisions. Historically, it's been the financial drivers that's been important. As I mentioned, you get lower capex, lower opex, and that's what's driven the development in Cambi and why we have a very good market share in the UK. We're treating 50% of all the sludge in the UK. It's a privatized market, as you know, but the public sector is slowly coming along. I would say that what we bring to the table is a solution that will lower the carbon footprint. Our solution has the lowest carbon footprint irrespective of the biosolids outlet. So whether you go to land application or incineration, we provide the best solution. And of course, again, it will depend on the current situation that you have, how big the impact is.
You're a brick in that wall of that carbon neutral trend, or I mean, even if today it's only a fraction of the utilities which are looking at that target, I think it's something which might be growing. And if I'm right, I've seen a news where you were involved in such a project in China. Is that the case?
In China, I assume you're referring to the 5 large sludge centers that we have in Beijing, but we are also having a plant in Chongqing and also in Hong Kong. But in Beijing, we treat the sludge from more than 20 million people, which is just massive. If you compare to what they did prior to these plants being built and today's situation with the Cambi THP, they've reduced the carbon emissions by 2.2 million tons per year. But of course, they had alternatives to our solution, incineration. They would still have a big saving. But if you look at what is directly attributable to the Cambi THP, basically the difference between incineration and the THP, we have a saving of 400,000 tons. And that is enormous. And we have other examples of projects that's got similar drivers. So in a way, the fact that we bring this to the table, the benefits, lowering your carbon footprint, but you can do that and at the same time lower your costs. And that should be a very easy decision to make for any utility, right? And you also have all the other benefits I talked about. Right? No odor of the biosolids, half the trucks leaving the plant. The community would love you for it, right? As a city leader. But there is some conservatism, and the decision making take time. It take 3, 4, 5 years before you start a project, or even a decade. So it's moving slowly, and the sense of urgency is perhaps one of the things that surprised me the most entering this industry, Antoine. It's very different to the private industries and how quickly you jump on things that makes perfect sense.
I guess it's the two sides of the same coin, but usually we refer to it as the water industry is conservative for a reason, and then you can agree with it and you can fight it and you can be mad at it, but it is what it is. So it's a difficult field to that extent, but also the other side of it is that it's a very resilient field. So yeah, two sides of the same coin. But I won't sidetrack you here. You mentioned that you're reducing the cost. So whoever is using your process has to invest. So it's a capex. And then you're reducing the OPEX. But what is your average return on investment?
There's not one answer to that question. The example I gave, Washington D.C. is an extreme case, right? You actually have a saving from day one. But if I'm to generalize, again, depends on the drivers. I would say 5 years plus minus in order to have a payback on the investment. So it really depends on the situation. If you need to increase the capacity, you need to do something. Obviously, then the capex element will be offset or at least reduced quite significantly. If you are doing it only to increase your biogas production and to lower your handling costs of the biosolids, then obviously you're looking at a longer payback. And then you're looking at 5 years typically.
Today, if I try to unpack your business model, you have one part of the business model, which is those capex sales, and you have another part of the business model, which is to do design, build, operate. Plus, you have a layer of services. If I'm right, today, the biggest chunk is your capex sales. Is that your history, or is that really the way you want to address that market today?
That you're absolutely right. Historically, the capex sales, new plants, that's been the lion's share of our business, and that's gradually changed. I would say primarily over the last 5-6 years, where we've had a higher focus and attention on the aftermarket, spare part sales and support during annual shutdowns or upgrade of our installed base with the latest development that we've made. And one of the things that we've also worked on, you're referring to the DBO segment, design, build, own, and operate. That's something we worked on for a couple of years. It's an important strategic direction for Cambi, where we're looking to accelerate projects, whether it's a municipality or a group of municipalities that see a need but want to avoid the investment cost burden of realizing a project. Maybe they want to expedite it. We can come in and get paid a gate fee, and we're going to own and operate that plant. In a way, we are targeting to get a higher share of our business being recurring revenue, both from the DBO segment and also the aftermarket. And my ambition is that these recurring revenues will cover all our costs in, if you give it 5, 6, 7 years. That is my ambition, because this is a project business in many ways. When the project's going to come in, no one knows. We know that it's going to come, but you'll have fluctuations in capex sales. So that is important to us.
So you mentioned DBO, but if I understand you right, it's DBOO. It's design, build, own, and operate.
Yes, and you could call it PPP projects, public-private partnerships. There's many acronyms to it, but basically owning and operating the plants, yes.
I mean, you have the trendy way to look at it as well, which would be to say you're doing sludge management or biogas production enhancement as a service. Everything can be as a service nowadays, right? And it's all of a sudden much more trendy, even if it's the same than the DBOO.
Yes, you're right. You could argue that we could take a plant, as you talked about the containerized one. We could come in at a brownfield project and say, if you give us the permits necessary, concrete slab, we'll come in with the THP, we'll treat it, you'll pay a gate fee as a service, and once the contract's up, we'll take it back and move it to the next plant. So in a way, you could say it's treatment as a service.
That's a business model we've covered on that microphone with Cambrian Innovation, with Inopsis, with Axin Water, and all what they had in common when they were on that microphone is that they explained something quite similar to what you said, that there is a barrier to adoption in that water industry, and that somehow when you come with that business model, it's not like the martingale, which beats all of them, but it reduces that barrier to adoption because it reduces the friction. So it just rings the bell when you say you have containerized plants. I'm just thinking, yeah, as you said, you ask the customer for a concrete slab, and then if you're upgrading the biogas production by 40%, maybe you can get half of that upgrade, and that's your fee. So it's kind of a no risk for the end user and probably a nice benefit for you. But yeah, I'm just beating open doors.
Absolutely. Biogas is obviously one part of it, but I think what is the strongest driver in the current climate is the fact that you reduce the volume of the biosolids by 50%, and it's a higher quality, giving more outlets for it. So that is a big benefit that in a situation like that you would share between the plant and Cambi.
Regarding those outlets, the fact that your process is killing the pathogens, does that mean that you can have new applications of that treated sludge?
Yes, absolutely. And if you use thermal hydrolysis, you get a Class A product, as I said, free of pathogens, and the number of outlets where you can land apply goes up. It may be areas that's closer to the plant as well. And when you see in some markets in the US, for example, that more and more landfills are being closed or they're reaching their capacity and they're having challenges with our solution, that can help the situation.
We mentioned wastewater treatment plants turning into water resource factory. One element of that is that you might be tempted to go into resource recovery. Is that a field you're investigating?
Out with the fact that we bring phosphorus and nitrogen back through the biosolids by land applying it. If you're referring to phosphorus recovery, obviously that's something that we're keeping an eye on as well. But we don't have any plans to start that journey in Cambi at the moment. I think one of the reasons why we've been so successful is that we've been very focused on where our core competency lies. And then, of course, we're interested in other technologies, other businesses. We're on the outlook for candidates for M&A, but starting ourselves to develop into a new direction is not on the agenda at the moment.
So, if expanding on the horizontal is not on your agenda, I have a question that might hurt the former CFO in you, because if I'm right, you were the CFO of Cambi before becoming the CEO.
Mm.
So far, Cambi had a steady, sustainable growth. And if now I'm thinking, just out of the box, you're beating the barrier to adoption because you go much more into DBOO and you're much more aggressive with that growth. I mean, you're building containers and then you start beating the doors of utilities. Would that be a path which is appealing to you, or do you want to stay on your steady and sustainable growth? Which is, I mean, it's not a judgment, my question. It's really to understand where you're heading.
We are looking at a faster growth, or there's a reason why we decided to go public about a year ago. We raised capital in order to invest more heavily in the DBO segment. One thing is to land that first contract, which will be a very important milestone for us, but it's also investing more in sales and marketing. Basically, what we're doing in the sales process is educating the various stakeholders. I think one of the largest bottlenecks we have is marketing or knowledge about our solution. So increasing that awareness is important to ensure growth. When it comes to investing in growth and developing, even in years that has been slow because of project execution has been on hold or new contracts have been delayed, we've always continued to invest in R&D. So we continue investing in that, and we will continue. That is in our DNA, being an innovative company. And we did launch a new product last year, and we are close to launching yet another product this year, which will further reduce the energy need by 30% compared to the current models. So we continue to develop both to keep an eye on competition, obviously, but also to be aware and meet the customer needs, the current and what we expect in the future. So
How does that translate into the company's structure? If my research is right, you're 130 people inside Cambi.
about 130, yes.
What are the big equilibriums? I mean, how many people are working in R&D? How many people are working in sales?
We in R&D, I would say we are 5 people that focuses on R&D. There's a lot of people that contributes, that chips in, that's got the ideas, that is part of the development. Of course, there's many disciplines involved in, especially in product development, and then you have the research element, which is a bit different. And in sales, we have about 15 internal resources, but we also have representatives and agents and consultants that work for us in some areas.
And what is your go-to market route? Do you go directly to the end users or do you integrate into EPCs? I mean, the Suez, Veolia of this world.
Yeah, our main contacts in the sales journey would be, of course, the end customer in some cases, but in other cases, it will be consultants early phase during feasibility studies, for example. And then once you approach the tender phase, obviously the main contractors are the ones that we're dealing directly with.
You mentioned your IPO last year. What does it change for a company like Cambi to go public?
I think the biggest change that we've seen is that we are more known in the market. And I'm not talking the Norwegian general public or financial community, but I'm actually referring to to the industry. The approach we have from potential customers, the inbound requests, it's difficult to say for sure and pinpoint that to being due to the IPO or if it's due to the efforts that we've done in marketing over several years, of course. But my hypothesis is that this has contributed positively. Internally, it's a bit of the opposite. We came from being a family-owned business and an openness where everyone knew everything that was going on. As a public company, you need to manage the information flow a bit stricter. So in a way, it's changed Cambi somewhat.
You've mentioned how your ambition is to develop your DBO part of the business in order to secure your cash flow and not be that much relying on the markets having ups and downs like every capex market, but especially in the water industry. Beyond that, what's your definition of success for Cambi for the next 5 or 10 years?
Beyond the recurring revenue side, I would say that entering some of the markets that we worked on for years, I mentioned India, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, those would be important elements. But I'm also inclined to say that it would also be to enter the private market, looking at treatment of other substrates, whether it's sand-laden manure or crops or other substrates, where the drivers for increased biogas is obviously stronger now. It's very exciting to work on. But if we can penetrate that, I think that would be a sign of a very big success for Cambi.
You mentioned at the very opening of that discussion that you are sludge and not only. Is that your ambition, or are you already doing something beyond sludge today?
We do have plants that do only food waste or a combination of sludge and food waste already. What I was referring to now is other substrates other than that. But of course, our main market now is sewage sludge, but also some food waste.
Thanks a lot. I think that was a thorough deep dive, and I think I understand a bit better the realm of Cambi. And it sounds, I mean, I was excited before, I'm still excited after. So, so thanks a lot for the openness and for everything you shared. If that's fine with you, I propose you to switch to the rapid fire questions.
Sounds good, Antoine.
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
So in that last section, I try to keep the questions short, and you have to keep the answers short, but I'm never cutting the microphone. First question, what is the most exciting project you've been working on and why?
I would actually refer back to what I just mentioned around approaching the industrial market and different feedstocks, the work we've done in the lab, and also the dialogue we have with several private companies. That's really exciting at the moment.
Can you name one thing that you've learned the hard way?
I would say it's perhaps a bit personal, Antoine, answer to this, but 11 years ago, I was on vacation in India and I decided to go hiking in Leh. And I came there, I met an elderly couple, a British couple in their late 60s, early 70s, and they had been to the summit and they managed. And I was thinking, well, I have better gear. I'm younger than them. So if they could, for sure, I will be able to, right? It was really a motivation for me to hear that. I started walking. Of course, I got altitude sickness. I was confused. I saw the river flowing up the mountain and decided, okay, I need to turn around. And what I learned was I've set a goal, but I need to not be too fixated on the path, right? It is different paths. You need to listen to the ones around you. So when you said, what's your goal for the next 5 years? I have a goal. I have a path in mind, but that may change the path to get there. So I would say that's a lesson learned.
That's an interesting lesson learned. It's also a very interesting metaphor. So thanks for sharing that one. Is there something you're doing in your job today that you will not be doing in 10 years?
Definitely around digitalization. I would say we're quite good in general, the way I work. Instead of a notebook, I use remarkable digital the pencil. But for the industry or the company, I would say the remote monitoring that we're working on as one small step in improving and digitalizing the industry. I think that we will see in the next 10 years changing dramatically.
What is the trend to watch out for in the water sector?
More and more cities set climate neutrality targets, and they're raising up to the challenge. The shift is evident, and it warrants an adoption of new and advanced technologies. So it's exciting times, and what we'll see is a green transformation industry, is what I believe.
If you were a world political leader, what would be your very first action to influence the fate of the world's water challenges?
Oh, that's a big one, Antoine. Of course, you have the sanitation problem. Right? If you think of the globally, about a quarter or around 30% having access to safe treatment of wastewater, which is extremely important to tackle. So what I would say is that I would look at a way to adapt the challenges and have the different parts of the industry work together to make sure we get safe wastewater, safe treatment of wastewater to a larger part of the population, with private money or public money, or a combination.
Would you have someone to recommend me that I should definitely invite on that same microphone?
I think it would be very interesting for you to talk to Vinod Tar, which is the founding head of the national mission for Clean Ganga in India. The work that they're doing both on sanitation and developing plans and using think tanks to come up with a plan, including the resource recovery and biosolids master plan. I think it would be a really interesting person to talk to.
Thanks a lot for the recommendation. And as I said, thanks a lot for everything you shared in that interview and conversation. And if people want to follow up with you after everything we discussed today, where shall I redirect them the best?
Obviously, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find the company there as well. Or if you want to read up more on company, go onto Cambi.com.
So like always, all the links will be in the episode notes. Eirik, thanks a lot. And I'd be happy to check on your path in a couple of years. So
Thank
see
you very much, Antoine. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.